anybody can't see that screen, can you let me know, please? So first of all, we're going to look at frustration and anger. We're going to try and understand anger a little bit so that we can understand why our children feel angry and also why we feel angry sometimes and what we can do to manage that behaviour. So frustration and anger. So frustration is the feeling that we have when we are prevented from progressing or succeeding or being fulfilled. So when our needs aren't met, we're not getting what we feel we need, we can start to feel angry. And examples of situations like that are when we feel afraid, when we feel a lack of control, a feeling or sense of injustice, when we feel invaded in any way, threatened, or a feeling of inadequacy. I think we can all relate to that, and we can always see that our kids feel that sometimes. They feel scared, so they behave in an angry way. They feel out of control, which, I mean, generally children are out of control to a large degree, but those with difficulties more so. They feel that they don't have any control over their own situation. Feeling a sense of injustice, they feel that something's not fair, that they're not being treated fairly, or life's not fair. We feel invaded, threatened, or inadequate. So the definitions is frustration is an emotion and anger is an emotion. So it's perfectly normal for us to feel those things. And our body reacts in a way to protect us when we feel those things. It puts us in a fight or flight situation. On the other hand, aggression is a behaviour. So there's more control and more choice over that. So although we can't help feeling frustrated or angry, we can learn in time to control how we react to those emotions. And that's what we want to be teaching our kids, that they can have some control over how they behave, even though they've got those strong feelings. I'm going to use the rainbow of intolerance to explain just what's going on when our children, or ourselves indeed, are feeling frustrated or angry. So we have a period of or a feeling or an area of time where what we call optimal functioning, where we feel good, where we can cope, where we can manage. And for some of us, that window is quite big, and for some of us it's quite small. And I'm sure that most of you are here today because the children you're helping or caring for, their window of tolerance is probably quite small because they have the difficulties they have. So, and that also can apply to us when we're trying to help those children. So the optimal functioning period is that time where we're able to listen and learn, where we can understand things, we can rationalize things, we can manage our behavior. On the outskirts of that, we start to get those feelings where we know as adults, we know that we're starting to feel out of that comfort zone. And then we need to start being a bit careful. And then as it goes, we go further out of that comfort zone, we need to take a break and we need to take action to manage our behaviour. So we have to do this for ourselves, but we also have to, as parents, manage our children to be able to do that for themselves as they get older, but to help them do it while they're young, to give them the tools. So there are two types of behaviour or two types of response to anger. So some people will be angry and get really emotional, really loud, cry, scream, extreme distress, hyperventilating, extreme emotion, can have panic attacks, that big, loud sort of reaction to anger. And that's called hyperarousal. Whereas there are some, when they're distressed, that have a slow breathing, a flat effect, a dissociation. So they just switch off, and that's hypoarousal. So they're both strong emotions, they're both strong reactions to emotions, but people react in different ways. So hyperarousal is extreme distress. And as I said before, the hyperventilating, extreme emotion, panic attacks, screaming, shouting, kicking, that's all of those emotions. So to look out for those, or to learn to manage that, we have to recognize when that's starting to happen. So really, at this stage, or obviously your children will be all different ages, but the early stages, we are helping them to regulate their behavior in the hope that by helping them to regulate their behavior and repetition of what we can do to help that, they learn to do it themselves when they're adults, maybe even a bit before if we're really lucky. So looking out for those signs are, we need to look for heightened anxiety, difficulty focusing, tears, rapid speech. That's a sign that we're going to have a major tantrum, meltdown, whichever it is, which we will look at further. So we need to be careful as we come to the outskirts of that tolerance window, and then we know that we need to take a break. So for some people, getting upset or angry looks like a flat effect. They completely shut down. They check out. They just don't want to know. They hide. And we can have both reactions to anger, but generally we tend to lean more towards one. So this is hypoarousal. So we need to look at when we're getting towards that stage of feeling flat, we notice our kids' behavior changing. So there'll be delayed responses, shutting down, emotional withdrawal. When that starts to happen, we know that they're heading towards that really flat dissociation, that basically checking out, don't want to talk to anybody, hiding, and all of those behaviors. So as we said, between those 2 points of reactions, we have optimal arousal. So kids and adults are able to listen, learn, cope, and manage their emotions. So in line with that, if we look at that window of tolerance, we need to help our kids to understand the point that that changes. Obviously, we need to be aware of that too. We need to be really vigilant and notice that in the early stages, and hopefully teach them to notice it themselves. So here we have a picture of the anger iceberg, which is something that I use in therapy with children quite a lot, and adults sometimes, but mainly children. It's a visual aid that will help the children to see what comes before that angry bit. So if you relate it to an iceberg in the sea, the bit on the top is what you see, the angry bit, and the bottom is everything underneath. And as we know, with an iceberg, the underneath's bigger than the top, you know. So we need to get them to look at what comes before that angry. So the angry is what everybody sees and often judges them on. And what we want to get them to do is recognize what comes before, which is the first one before that would always be frustration, because the frustration leads to the angry. But then if you can talk to them about what they're feeling before then. So when you felt that, what did you feel? Like peeling back the layers of the onion. You can't do this when they're already angry, by the way. You've got to do this when they're in that optimum period, in that rainbow where they can manage and cope and understand. So you have to pick your moment to do these things. We can't do it while they're already angry. It's not going to work. But we can look at the frustration. What led to that frustration? Were they feeling sad? Were they feeling jealous? Were they feeling worried? Was something not fair? I have to admit, when I work with kids, it's nearly always not fair. Something's not fair. Something's not right. They're feeling that in some way their needs are not getting met. As a parent, we know it's frustrating, isn't it? Because we know that we're doing our absolute best to meet all those needs, but in reality, we can't read their minds. We don't always know, and we're not always in control, because when they're at school or with other people, we can't control what goes on there. So this is why it's important for us to, over time, and it's a slow process, teach them when to recognize it themselves. So what happened, think of a situation, let them tell you what's happened, and then, so you felt angry, so I bet you were really frustrated. So what was going on? What did you feel about that? What did you feel about that? Really get to the feelings, not the thoughts. Well, I thought this. No, but what did you feel? And it's an exercise that can be done as many times as you like over as many incidents, but the idea is that they start to recognize how they're feeling. It's also good for us if we recognize how we're feeling, what our breaking point is. So what do we have next? So anger is perfectly normal response, and it's there to protect us. It's just, if any of you suffer from anxiety, it is a very similar physical reaction. All the hormones are released, adrenaline, all of those things. Anger creates an energy because it's giving you, your body is giving you the tools to be able to manage the crisis that you're in order, that has created the anger. So the anger creates an energy, and when I'm talking to people, I say it's like a ball of energy inside you, and it's got to be used. So how do we use that energy? So there are many ways of using that energy, and what we don't want is aggression. So we need to be, for ourselves and our children, looking at ways that use that energy up that isn't aggression. For us, as adults, it's usually assertiveness. If we can learn to manage how we communicate our feelings and have our boundaries in place and be quite assertive in how we communicate those boundaries, that's usually enough over time to control that. But obviously there's things like the physical stuff. We can do physical things, we can go for a walk, we can go for a run, we do the things we know what will help us. With children, we need them to come up with the ideas themselves. What will help them? What do they like doing? What gets rid of that energy? Can be jumping up and down on the spot, running around the garden. It can be anything. But we want them to come up with it, because we want them to understand that it's okay to have those feelings. But what we're going to do about it? How can we use that feeling productively? So how can our behaviour help the child? So we don't want to label the child as the problem. The problem is something separate. They feel guilt, shame, and embarrassment when they're angry, or afterwards, actually, after they've been angry and they've behaved in a way that they don't like, that they're not comfortable with. Sorry, people still coming in, excuse me, I admit them. So we are teaching them that it's okay to be angry. That's the main thing. So they feel guilty, they feel ashamed, they feel embarrassed when they behave in a way they don't like. So we need to be able to monitor and regulate ourselves in order to model a behavior that can be positive to them. So if we're regulating ourselves, they will realize that that's a good thing, and they will model us in time. And as I'm saying all this, I know it's frustrating, because I know it's not easy, and I know it's not a quick job. It is a long sort of process, and we have to be patient, but we can't be perfect. So if we don't regulate ourselves well, that's fine, but we need to repair. We need to show them that, that what we did wasn't great, what we said wasn't great, we don't feel great about ourselves, apologize, talk them through it, just to show them that we're human too, and that's okay. So I've had children with difficulties myself. I've fostered and had my own children that were challenging. So I know it's frustrating, and we're not going to be perfect. But these are sort of ways that we can change our thinking a little bit. We don't need to be perfect. We don't need to be good at everything. We don't need to do it right every time. but we do need to look at how we can repair when we don't. So children's brains aren't developed enough to understand adult logic. So that's worth remembering. So when we have logic about a situation, we've been angry, we've behaved in a way we don't like, feel a bit rubbish, but we rationalize it, we repair it as best we can, and we move on. For children, they struggle with that. So we need to model it and help them to do that. It's also important to remember that when somebody is angry, they're expressing a need. We might not agree with that need, but they're still expressing a need, and it's finding out what that need is. So asking the question, how can I help you? How can I help you right now? What can I do? Might be nothing, but we ask the question to show them that we're there and give them some space, but be visibly present, because it is largely you or your attention that they are needing in that moment, but they maybe can't cope with it. Going back to how different people react to anger, you know, some people just want to be left alone, just want their own space, just want to hide. And then other people are massively overwhelmed and their behavior is loud and big. So, you know, they might need that space, but we want them to see. So putting them away, you know, go to your room and shut the door or whatever, it's tempting, but it's not great, because they feel alienated, they feel isolated. If they isolate themselves, that's a different thing, but still remain around and just every now and then say something that shows you're there, so they don't feel rejected, I suppose, because of their behavior. So meltdowns are very different, and I'm aware that a lot of you have children that will be having meltdowns as opposed to temper tantrums. So if your child has ASD, SPD, they spend all day masking, they cope by masking, and they're not able to communicate what's wrong. So this results in meltdowns or shutdowns when all that energy that they need to get through the day is used up. So it is a different thing. They can hold it together for so long, but they can't continue. So this results in meltdowns or shutdowns. So meltdowns are not tantrums and they're not punishable. So a tantrum versus a meltdown, what's the difference? So a tantrum will be, often is, largely attention seeking, trying to regain control, trying to be in control, trying to communicate something. And they are able to calm themselves when the situation's resolved. So basically, if they're screaming and crying because they want something and you give them that thing, very quickly they calm down. They've got their own way, they've got what they need. A meltdown, they don't consider their own safety. They're not in control. And they're not able to calm down until that energy is spent. So even if you give them what you feel they need, or even what they feel they need, that's not going to stop that meltdown. So a safe place, let them know you're there, but not, you know, sort of give them space, but just be visible, be present. And it has to see its course. This is where we're looking at that the rainbow of tolerance does apply in this case. It's recognizing those signs. And I know for some people they do come out of nowhere, but there always will be a trigger. And in time, we do learn what those triggers are. And the most important thing is to enable your children to recognize when those triggers are there over time as they get older. So how can we help? And what can we do to cope with meltdowns? So creating a sensory diet. Those with sensory processing disorder or any kind of sensory overload problems, find out what works. Again, don't wait till it's escalated. When things are okay, find out what works. Talk about things with your child, what makes them feel better. Physical activity. If after school is a difficult time, which often it is, factor in some time for self-regulation. Whatever the weather, going to the park after school, letting them run around, that may work. Follow their interests. What do they like doing? Crafts, that sort of thing. Building stuff. What is it that slows them down? What is it that helps them regulate themselves? Some kind of physical activity like dancing, gymnastics, that sort of thing can help, or does help, but it might be that they just need to go a bit crazy without any structure. And we need to factor in that time where we're not saying, oh, don't do this, don't do that, a safe place to enable them to do that. And that's something that over time, as your kids get older, you can talk to them about. Will be situations, I appreciate, where you can't do that. So it is a matter of watching and learning and seeing what they enjoy and bringing that into it. Creating a safe space. This is like, especially for those children that just go quiet and need to hide. So involve the child in that process and teach them to go there when they feel overwhelmed. This can also apply for those that do really exhibit emotional, strong behaviours. They might want this safe place afterwards. So yeah, we have an idea of what a safe place looks like, but we really need to involve them. What do they like? It can be under the bed, it can be a tent, it can be behind something, but it's usually quite a small space, usually. And let them put things there that they want and need when they feel like that, whether that's a blanket, whether it's a sensory toy, whatever it is. Have a collection of things there that they go and they can make themselves feel calm and safe. Create a focus, focusing the mind, the prefrontal cortex, the front of the brain. That is what helps us to regulate ourselves. So when we are out of control, we're on autopilot. The same goes for anxiety. So this is a tool for coping with anxiety. If we are behaving in a way that is autopilot, so we're not thinking, then we need to bring it back to a focus. So some people would say it's a distraction. Yes, it is, but it's also literally like switching on the prefrontal cortex of the brain so that it starts to override the autopilot, because the autopilot is behaving in how we always behave, our go-to, what we always do, and we want to come away from that. So it can be arts, crafts, cooking, puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, that sort of thing, anything that just focuses the mind. You notice in all of these I haven't put a tablet. I know that the children use tablets to regulate and calm down, and they're really good for that, but we do need to put other stuff in place as well. It's just more helpful for them to have other coping mechanisms. Wind down time, sensory story, talk through their day. That's quite a good tool for any child with difficulties or not, to be honest. If you can get them to chat through their day in between, for argument's sake, school and bed, they process it. So, for example, I had a little girl that was ASD and her sensory overload was quite big and she was struggling, and she was very tiny, to be honest. She was only 4, but from the moment she had her bath and we were getting ready for bed, we would talk, what have we done today? You got up, you had your breakfast, what did you have, and then what did we do, blah blah blah, all through the day, so that by the time she went to bed, she was she'd been through a day, she'd processed her day, and that did work. It worked for her. So we've got a message in the chat, so just let me look at that. Okay, so somebody with PDA and will not talk about emotions and feelings. So trying to talk about things with him is a trigger. Yeah. So tough. It's a difficult one, a really difficult one, but we can still recognize those triggers without talking about them. I suppose that's what we need to do. So by doing some of the exercises, by being observant and stepping in and gradually helping them to recognize those things without any deep and meaningful conversation, which is where I think what you mean, that's the way forward. It still is getting them to understand their own triggers, and being it, especially with PDA, actually learning, teaching your child or helping them to learn that they do have an element of control, because they do feel that they need that control. That control is a big factor there. So if they can feel they're in control of their own situation, and we can guide them towards that, which will be a longer, slower process, getting them to recognize emotions. It doesn't have to be a big conversation. It can just be I can, so validation really, and so I can see that you're frustrated, I can see that you're angry, so what can I do to help you, or what can you do, what would you like to do? It's not going to work overnight, but it's a long, slow process. So with children, what we actually want to do is always validate. Don't dismiss their emotions. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be all of that. And then empathize. I can understand you feel that way. I can remember feeling like that once, that sort of thing. And then action. So what can we do about it? What would you like to do about it? So validate, empathize, action. So one of the breathing exercises that works quite well with children, they don't need any other tool apart from their hands. They can do this at school, they can do it on the way to school, they can do it just when they're feeling that they need to regulate themselves. We can do it with them initially, we can just show them how to do it, but it is quite a good exercise. So they hold their hand out like a star, and they use their pointer finger from the other hand and literally move the finger up and down, the pointer finger up and down the fingers of the other hand. And every time you go up, you breathe in, and down you breathe out. Up you breathe in, and down you breathe out. Done really slowly. And get them to notice how they feel. Do it over and over again until they notice how they feel. This is useful if they are somewhere where they haven't got something to use or something to do, and they can just do that quite discreetly, quite calmly. And the more they do it and they see it as a coping mechanism, the more effective it is. We know, don't we, that if we breathe in and out a bit slowly, count the breath, as it were, and monitor our breathing, we know that that slows the heart rate down. So this is a way of teaching our children to do that. Another one is mindful drawing. I realise that not all the children that will be able to do this. I know that not everybody will be able to do this, but those that can, it's a useful exercise. Can be quite fun. So when they're doing some drawing or some colouring, get them to do some breathing, use the hand technique, the finger on the hand, and then get them to pick up a pen with their hand that they don't usually use. So we get them I used to do this with a crowd of children, get them to put hold up their hand that they normally use to write with, and then get them to hold their pencil in the other hand, and get them to draw a circle with that hand. So if they're right-handed, get them to do it with their left hand, and then get them to add things to that drawing, inside the circle, outside the circle, whatever they might want to make it into a face, make it into something. And they will become calm with that exercise. And the reason they'll become calm with that exercise is because it's focus. It's about focusing the mind, which is what we talked about earlier, taking the thoughts processes from the autopilot to the logical prefrontal cortex. It slows the mind, helps us to think more rationally and calmly. Do that.